So when you're approaching your patient and you're forming your general impression, you can see what would be obvious death, and the first example of that would be somebody who is in rigor mortis. And what that is the stiffening of the muscles and joints that begins after death. So rigor starts in the head and moves down to the feet. And rigor actually goes in the rule of 12s. So what that means is it takes 12 hours for the body to go into full rigor, where it stays in full rigor for 12 hours, and then it takes 12 hours for the body to release from rigor. But in any stage, it's obvious death. So the next one we have is injuries that are incompatible with life. So a good example of that would be somebody who has suffered from decapitation. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's very obvious that they are no longer alive. So another aspect of obvious death would be livor mortis, and what that means is blood pooling in the lowest possible portion of the body. So when somebody's been dead a long time, you know, their heart's no longer working, it's not circulating, blood's not flowing, so gravity does its job and the blood settles in the lowest part of the body. So in these times, CPR would really be useless, and it's not going to do anything because they are obviously deceased. But even with obvious death, there are special circumstances where we'll still work the patient to give families a peace of mind, no matter what age they are or even the circumstances. So here we have an example of livor mortis. So as you can see, he's got all of this bruising down here, and that is all the blood that has pooled. So he's been deceased for quite a while because it looks like the vast majority of his blood volume has already settled. So the first time that we have an exception to the obvious death statement is with children. So children are susceptible to SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. It's the leading cause of death in infants 1 month old to 1 year old, and they actually grow out of it as they get older. So even when death is obvious, it may still be necessary and ethical to work them and take them to the hospital for the parent or the family's sake. Really let them feel like you did everything you could to save their child, because in reality, there really is no greater act of trust than a parent handing you their child. And you should try to do everything you can for the family's sake, even if you know that there's nothing else that can be done. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, we also have adults or our elderly patients. Even when they've been obviously deceased, family may not be ready to let go of a family member. It may have been a surprise. They may not have been prepared for it, you know, it happens. So what you would do is you would work the patient and allow the family to come to terms with the death, and possibly, if the situation permits, let them ask you to stop. Transport to the hospital and allow the hospital to make that call. So with elderly and adults, DNRs and living wills come into play. So a DNR is a do not resuscitate order, and they're extremely common in our elderly patients and must be respected even if our personal beliefs are different. And they must have proper documentation, not a copy. And let me add that it must be completely filled out. There can be no missing signatures or it is invalid. What's interesting is a DNR can actually be rescinded by a family member if no power of attorney has been named to protect the patient's wishes. So basically what that sentence is saying is, let's say you respond to an elderly patient and their children are on scene and the patient has a DNR. If one of their family members says, screw the DNR, save my mother or my father, you know, whoever it is in the situation, then the DNR is now voided and you would work the patient, as we talked about in the last slide. But what a power of attorney is it's somebody that the DNR holder has appointed to make sure that their wishes are protected. So a family member may tell you to screw the DNR, you know, save my mother, save my father. But if somebody comes forward and says, no, I am the power of attorney, and hands you the paperwork and says, respect the DNR, you know, that's what they wanted, then even though somebody wanted you to work them, you have to respect the power of attorney and what they want. So a living will is another one, and it's a living document that directs what kind of medical care your patient would like to receive if they're ever unable to make the decision themselves. So I actually had one of these. I wasn't really sure how to deal with it. So I was in the hospital doing one of my clinicals, and I had a patient who just went completely unresponsive mid-sentence, was talking and then just wasn't talking anymore. It was very strange, and it confused me quite a bit. So it turned out that he had a living will or advance directive that said that he was okay with being intubated, but he would not accept any form of CPR. So his heart rate was still looking pretty good, so all we could do was intubate him and breathe for him. I don't know what happened to him, but I just thought it was a very interesting situation. So a lot of you may be asking, what is our role in obvious death? So at times, all we can really do is provide support for the family as they cope with the death of a loved one. So what you can do is allow them time to cope, offer to call family or religious figures to grieve with them. A family may have a lot of questions, and answer as honestly as you can, but never lie or give your personal opinions. Don't say that he or she's in a better place now, or he and she is with God, because those are your personal opinions and may anger a family who has a different religious view than you. So there are actually 5 steps in the grief process. So the first one is going to be denial, and that's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll go ahead and move on to the second stage. So the second step is anger. You know, if you had gotten here faster, they would have made it. You know, don't take this anger personally. You know, they just lost someone and they're trying to cope the best that they can. And a lot of times it comes with blaming somebody. You know, nobody really ever wants to blame nature. They want something physical to blame. So the third step is bargaining. You know, I actually heard this one, and it's very, very heartbreaking when they get to this stage. I mean, there's really nothing you can do. I actually knew somebody who said this. They said, I will go to church every day if she will just wake up. And it's so heartbreaking for us as healthcare providers because there's nothing we can do. All we can do is really provide comfort. So step 4 is depression. You know, I really wish I had spent more time with them. I really wish they were still here. There's so much we didn't do. You know, sentences like that. This is also a very heartbreaking step for us as healthcare providers. Once again, all we can really do is provide comfort, offer to call family or a religious figure. And the 5th step is acceptance. That's where they understand that their loved one is not coming back, and they move on and deal with it as best as they can. So a termination of CPR is truly dependent on one's medical director or protocols. So could we have done anything? At least once in our careers in the EMS field, there will be a patient who, despite all your best efforts, will not make it. Many services are equipped to help you deal with these calls. Reach out to your supervisor, talk to your partner, seek help with your services counselors. That's what they're there for, is to help you through these calls and keep yourself mentally healthy. Don't feel like you have to keep it bottled up.